I'm going to show you a game of Abimanyu Mishra, 14 years old super talent from United States who's holding the record of youngest grandmaster in the world. And he's playing in the last round of the US Championships against former world's number 2 Aronian. And Mishra, he's just a superstar, a sort of a genius. It's what Fabiano Caruana called him just before they played each other in the penultimate round of the US Championships. Mishra is a man to look forward to in the near future. We will definitely hear more from him. Before the tournament started, he had a rating of 25.92, but he is climbing up the ladder and making incredible performances in this tournament so far, the US Championships. He has already 4 wins and 3 losses. He's a very exciting player to follow, and in the last round we are going to see what he is doing with the white pieces against Aronian. It's a very interesting game. Let's have a look. d4, knight f6, c4, g6, and we get some sort of King's Indian, because according to the tournament situation, Mishra is in 4th place, and Aronian is half a point behind him. So Levon really needs to play for a win to leapfrog him in the standings. So he chooses one of the sharper options with the black pieces. Therefore, the King's Indian, Bishop g7, Bishop g2, Fianchetto's system. It's a very solid, reliable way of playing for white. Knight c3, and now nice little provocation with an early knight c6. Black has not decided yet what it's gonna do with its d-pawn. Can go to d6 when you get King's Indian type of setups, but of course there is also a possibility maybe later to play the move d5 in case white goes knight f3, d5. You can get a transposition to Grunfeld type of positions, but with knight c6, white has various options. If you play d5 to go after the knight will come in to e5 to attack the pawn on c4. That's not too problematic for black at all. White in the game goes for the move e3, modest continuation, d6, knight ge2, e5, and now white closes the center with d5. Attacking the knight goes back to e7, and this position has been reached in a number of games. It's a solid setup. It's not like the normal type of King's Indians you get to see, in which white has a pawn on e4, then black is moving the knight to prepare this plan with f5. White goes for b3, knight d7. Anyway, the knight goes away, so making space for the f-pawn to come forward. Bishop b2, f5 is played, and here we see Mishra is having his pawn on e3, not planning to put a pawn on e4, but instead he's playing the move f4, challenging the pawn on e5 and stopping black's f-pawn from coming any further. So it will be very hard for black to launch an offensive on the king's side. So he goes for e4. So he's giving away a square, so the knight can now come in to the d4 square. It's a very beautiful square for the knight to go to, with the intention of coming to e6, setting up a knight fork. So black got to move the knight away from d7 so that the bishop will cover the e6 square. And Aronian played the move knight f6. It's an interesting move, although in a way knight c5 looks even more attractive, so that apart from protecting the e6 square, you're also planning to come into d3 yourself. And I think the reason Aronian didn't play this move is that white will play here the move bishop f1, and the bishop was not doing too well on g2. If we go back one move, we see the bishop is blocked by a pawn on e4, a pawn on d5. It comes to f1 to guard the d3 square. Later on it can come to e2, where it's more efficiently placed, working on 2 diagonals. And maybe later, if white has completed its development, there are even plans to try to challenge that kingside pawn formation by black with a move g4. However, it's a complicated position. A lot of things can still happen. Maybe black goes a5, or maybe black plays c6 to challenge the pawn on d5. This is very standard way of playing. But Aronian chose differently, played knight f6, white castled kingside, and here he decided to play the move c5 to attack the knight on d4. And of course you would like to maintain your knight on that beautiful square. So therefore, en passant, capturing the pawn on c6, it's a very important idea, so that after b takes c6, at least some file has been opened, or at least it's a half open file, and white is trying to work on that part of the board. So he goes for the move queen d2, and your knight is safe on d4. You don't have to fear the move c5 as the knight comes in to b5 with huge pressure against the pawn on d6. So instead, Aronian starts with a6, probably to guard the b5 square one more time, and at the right moment be able to play c5. But white goes rook fd1, announcing plans to target the pawn on d6. Queen c7 played. Now very nice positional move by Mishra as he goes knight d e2, clearing the d-file so that white is attacking the pawn on d6 twice. Black got to defend it one more time, and here Mishra seizes the initiative with a key move c5. He is putting more pressure against that pawn on d6, and obviously the pawn cannot be taken as the rook can simply be captured by the queen. So that's not possible. If you close the position here with the move d5, then black will get other problems, as after the move knight a4, white has plenty of ideas, for instance, to come with a knight to b6. It's a weak square which can be nicely used by white. White is controlling the dark squared diagonal, intending maybe to come to e5 to attack the queen, or if later, if the knight from f6 moves away, you can exchange bishops. Look at this bishop on c8. It's a really bad bishop being restricted by its own pawns being placed on the same color. And white has long-term a lot of plans to advance on the queen side, probably put a knight on d5, d4, sorry, and that's just very unpleasant to play for black. So instead, Aronian goes for knight e8, protecting the pawn on d6. Now knight a4, white continues with the same plan and is looking forward to get rid of these bishops, because if pieces are getting swapped, it's clear that black's king later on may become more vulnerable. Bishop takes b2, queen takes b2. So here again, there are plans to come with a knight to d4 very soon. If you block the position, knight d4 is there, and white has a lot of ideas to expand on the queen side and looking for a pawn break based on the move b4, b5. Anyway, in the game, there follow the move knight d5, so Aronian is attacking the pawn on e3 with its knight, and it's a little bit uncomfortable. Here the queen gotta go back somehow to protect the pawn. At least, okay, you're protecting the pawn, you maintain control over the pawn on c5 at the same time as well. Knight ef6 was played here, and black is trying to fight its way back into the game with the plan of coming with a knight to g4, double attacking that pawn on e3 with both the knights. Knight d4 was played. Maybe there's a possibility here to take on d6. Maybe that would have been a bit more clever. After rook takes d6, you can come in with your queen to c5. It's a more active way of holding your position. Rook ac1 is a possibility. And well, there's a lot of pressure against black's pieces in this case. So that was a possibility, but Mishra goes for knight d4, which is very understandable. After the move knight g4, the pawn on e3 is a source of a problem for white. But Mishra had calculated this line. He wanted to ignore the threat by setting up a counterattack. He goes for knight b6. Very nice idea, as you're attacking the rook in the corner and you're about to eliminate that knight on d5. So knight takes b6, c takes b6, queen takes b6. White has sacrificed the pawn but is about to regain it. But if you take on c6 right now, the queens will be exchanged and well, the rook is hanging. But after moving the rook away, the pawn on e3 is a liability, and white has to make an uncomfortable move here. Let's say something like rook e1 to keep the pawn on the board. And I think this is absolutely unproblematic. But now let's get back to the game. We understand what Mishra's intention is. Before capturing the pawn on c6, he played a move h3, attacking the knight. And this is an important moment, because in the game, Aronian went back with the knight and the pawn on c6 could have been taken. This is what happened. But it should be mentioned that rather than going backwards with your knight, there is this option of setting up a counterattack by advancing your pawn to c5, hitting the knight on d4. So if white takes the knight, black takes as well, rook takes d4, and now it's complicated position with major pieces on the board. White's king is a bit open. Black should not be willing to take on g4, as that opens up the path for the bishop taking the pawn on e4. But instead, if you play d5 and next you put a bishop on e6, there's still everything to play for. I mean, black's bishop is restricted by its own pawns, but white's bishop is also unable to pose any serious threats. So back to the game, knight f6 played, but now after queen takes e6, queen takes, knight takes, attacking the rook goes to d7. Now the pawn on e3 is no longer hanging, as the knight has been forced to come back, and white plays the move rook ac1, and it's clear now that white's pieces, both the rooks and the knight on c6, they are more actively placed. Black played the bishop to b7, and now a very nice classy move by the 14-year-old Mishra. He goes knight a5. The knight is not badly placed at the side of the board, because you always have this option of eliminating that bishop from b7. You don't have to do it yet, but it means that black got to keep the bishop defended with its rook. Black goes for the move d5, and white is in control. White is occupying the only open file, and step by step he is going to improve his position. And this part of the game is played very, very nicely by Mishra. Let's have a look. First, he improves the bishop from g2, where it was not doing anything, to a diagonal where it's keeping an eye on that pawn on a6. Black goes king f7, and white is pushing its queenside majority. So the pawn comes to b4, and black has a majority in the center, but this pawn cannot really be pushed. The pawn is restricted. White is having a very nice grip on this d4 square. So black is having a very passive position with a bad bishop on b7, and Aronian is an active player. He's looking for counterplay and goes for the move rook g8, but I'm not sure this was such a great plan. The king goes away, so that after the move g5 you're not facing any problems along this g-file. White is playing a calm move. You're not in a rush, just playing a3. There's no need to play this move, but it's a useful move. You're just strengthening your position. G takes f4, G takes f4. It's not really clear what black is trying to accomplish, because there are no entry squares on the g file. The rook comes to g6. Now the knight comes back to b3. Wonderful idea, so that you are planning to get your knight back to the center. Rook h6, the knight comes into d4. I'm very impressed with the calmness of white's moves and the slow way of improving its position. It's very special for such a young player. Now you're attacking the pawn on f5, and well, here we see the drawbacks of black's strategy. Having advanced its pawn from g6 to g5, the pawn on f5 becomes a liability. Rook h5 played. Now the rook is oddly placed at the side of the board, protecting the pawn, and now white is taking over the c-file. Rook c5, knight g8, very passive move, but the knight is on its way to e7. White is doubling the rooks on the c-file. Now the knight comes to e7, and well, there's not an immediate way to crash through here. If you play rook c7, so that if black takes, you infiltrate with your rook. However, black can still support a rook on d7 with its king, and that's not something you would like to allow. So rather than playing rook c7, white just continues here with the move a4. So it's a 2 versus 1, and white is about to create a passed pawn. Rook h6 played. Now the knight is protecting the pawn so the rook can be released. And rather than pushing the pawn prematurely, first the move a5 is played, very nicely fixing the pawn on a6. Black is completely busted, not able to make any useful move. Played here the move king f8. That's a very sad move, of course. And now b5 played, so white is breaking through. Pawn takes b5, bishop takes b5, attacking the rook. The rook got to move, and then you can just enter with the rook on the 7th rank, hitting the bishop on b7. Bishop goes to a6. Now bishops can be swapped, and here there's this move rook b1, and all of a sudden there are huge problems regarding that king on f8. For instance, one idea is to go rook b7, get 2 rooks on the 7th rank, and then the knight is is in trouble, cannot be protected by any of the rooks because the knight is controlling the e6 square. The rook cannot come there to protect the knight. If the knight ever moves, the second rook doesn't have to come to the 7th rank, but it can even come to b8. And with rooks on the 7th and the 8th rank, that it's going to be a ladder made. So here, black just resigned. His position is completely paralyzed. For instance, if you go back to the back rank, rook a8, there is rook takes e7. That's a beautiful tactic, which was in the air as well. The idea is that if black recaptures, then you take with a knight on f5, and it's a knight fork, so after the king moves you take on h6, and white is just a full piece up. So this position is just absolutely hopeless. There's nothing black can do, and it's not every day that you see such a young kid crushing former world number 2 Levon Aronian in a very impressive style, which reminds me of Karpov in his best days or Tigran Pretosyan. They were restricting the opponent's possibilities. It's a very nice positional effort by white. Of course, there were some hidden tactical ideas, but it was just completely positional domination by the 14-year-old Mishra. So definitely we will hear more for him in the near future. His first tournament US Championships now is just finished. He ended on shared 2nd place behind Fabiano Caruana, together with superstars Wesley So and Lennart Dominguez. So that's probably one of the biggest accomplishments in his young career so far. In a few days, he is going to play in the Isle of Man tournament with a lot of top players participating there as well. So we will keep an eye on him. Definitely, we will cover him more in the near future on this channel. So don't forget to subscribe if you're interested to see how the youngest players are progressing.